Welcome to the AA Podcast, our little corner of the web where we are not afraid to discuss tough questions like,
when did nutrition, health, movement, and stress management become alternative medicine?
Where we embrace challenges in all aspects of life to become healthier and stronger versions of ourselves.
And where food and movement are the best kinds of medicine, and cooking meals at home is a revolutionary act. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the AA Podcast. This is Ashley Olson.
And I'm Andrea Crane.
We are back once again with another episode, and we're coming back to the hot topic of menopause.
Man. Yeah.
There's just so much
No
going
pun
on in this
intended.
space. Yeah, exactly.
That's funny.
There's just so much going on in the research realm, specifically with Dr. Bill Campbell, which if you listen to our hormone episodes a few weeks back, then you know his name or should have recognized his name because we mentioned him a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
He is an amazing researcher in the space that, I don't even know how long he's been in the space, but for decades now, he's been researching the fitness industry. And as of recently, I believe in the last 2 years, his interest has peaked in the space of menopausal weight gain and why that happens. And he is doing some deep dive studies on this. And I think literally racking his brain on
Mm-hmm.
things and hitting his head against the wall because it is a complex topic.
Boy, it
And
sure is.
as we get into today's episode, we'll kind of dive into why it's complex if you don't already know. But before we do all that, we are going to share our weekly Bible verse, and mine's coming from Psalms 46:10, and it says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth."
I love that. I have that on my kitchen counter.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
let's see. 1 Peter 3:8 is where mine is from this evening, and it says, finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind.
Well,
So,
that was a good one. Sorry. I'm still
uh,
dealing with a stupid cough, and
well,
it just comes out of
Ashley and I,
nowhere. So,
yeah, we kind of traded illnesses this week, so
yeah, it kind
you
of
might
sprung
be.
on me today, and I don't know. It's very annoying. But anyway, enough about that. Okay, so Andrea, this
Yes.
is kind of overviewing a study that Bill Campbell actually reviewed this last
Mm-hmm.
month, and um, so we're looking at the body composition changes and the menopausal transition.
Mm-hmm.
Do they correlate? Is there a causation? Like, what's going on
Right.
here? And so, we're gonna just kind of start breaking down, or Andrea's gonna really start breaking down the build of this study, why it was such a great one. And then we're actually going to split this up into at least 2 episodes, maybe a couple more or three. But
Mm-hmm.
we're going to just kind of start going through this study. So, where would you like to start?
Well, let's see. I think I'm just going to start at the beginning. So the study reviewed is called Changes in Body Composition and Weight During the Menopause Transition, and this is by Greendale et al. And it was published in 2019. Now the reviewers that are providing a lot of our information today are Dr. Bill Campbell, and a fitness expert, Brandy Bradley. Those are the two that combine forces to provide this review. But yeah, it's the purpose of this study essentially was, and this may seem like overly simplistic, but really the topic is very hard to tease apart. So they endeavored to determine if it was an age thing or a menopause thing. I don't know quite the best way to say this, but you
Well,
know.
there's a gradual, so men and women.
Mhm.
I don't think it's in that study review. He said it in his live, I believe. But men and women both over the course of age gain X amount of weight.
Right.
as we
Right.
age. Like
Mhm.
age related weight gain is very common,
Yeah.
if not like it's inevitable.
Mhm.
Um, and so, but men and women, I believe, gained relatively the same amount of weight, but because women on average weigh less than men, that
Mhm.
percentage of weight gain is a lot
Was higher.
was
Right.
much higher for
Mhm.
women than it would be for men.
Yeah. And the beauty of this data here is that we see changes in weight, but then and I'll just break this into the three parameters that they looked at. So they looked at weight gain, but then they also looked at lean muscle mass and then fat mass. All right. And so
Which is
essentially,
amazing.
yeah, that was really a power of this study. Um, so what they sought to determine was, okay, if you look at men as sort of a control, if you will, um, and compare them and their weight gain over time, over the course of aging, to women, and we see that both sexes gain weight over time, right? So you could come out and say, well, okay, then this weight gain that women experience and complain about so vociferously, this obviously is caused just by age, because men don't go through menopause, right? And yet they are still gaining the same amount of weight that women are. Um, However, when you break that down, weight gain can come in several different ways. And you and I have talked about this ad nauseum when we talk about body recomposition and those kinds of things, and how, a 160-pound female body that is jacked is going to look very, very different than a 160-pound female body with very little lean muscle. Like,
Exactly.
you won't even, yeah, you can't even compare the two. Okay.
Well, and I
So,
always say, like, my before and after pictures, like, you would have said I weighed more before than I do after, but
mhm.
as of right now, there's about a 12 to 15-pound weight difference of me weighing more now than I did prior.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's all muscle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's where the real that's where the nitty-gritty of this information goes is so over yes, we see this increase in weight, but what does that really look like? Are we putting on fat, or are we putting on muscle? Are we taking away muscle? Are we taking away fat? Like, what does this look like? So the the theory here are the theories. These are all the possibilities, okay? Either you could have the weight and the recomposition. So, and I'll just tell you, spoiler alert, recomposition gets worse as we age. So it's not like we're putting on tons of lean muscle and that's responsible for the weight gain, although that would be amazing, but that's not what is happening here. What is happening is that we are losing lean muscle and we are gaining fat. Okay.
So
So,
then that's where like that massive shift happens where you're like, my clothes don't fit anymore.
right. Exactly.
I don't feel like I living in the same body I used to
Yeah. Yeah.
because
No,
the
and
body
we're gonna
composition of lean mass to fat mass is
right.
different.
Right. And we're going to get into later on when we look at like the results of the study and what they actually found. We're going to get into like the degrees to which those happen. But for right now, so you always start a study with a theory, right? You have a supposition or a hypothesis of what you think is going to happen. And these are the available theories. As we could say that the weight gain and the negative recomp are due to simply aging. Or we could say that the weight and the recomp are due to hormonal changes of like peri and menopause, right? Or finally, we could say that the weight gain is due to aging, right? Because if we use men as a quasi control, then we could say, okay, the weight gain is due to aging, but maybe the recomp is due to the peri and menopausal changes. All right. So those are kind of the three possibilities when we're looking at women and what happens to us over this period of time. Um, Now, the authors correctly acknowledge that this is difficult to tease apart because both of these things are occurring at once, right? It's simultaneous that a woman is aging and going through perimenopause and that menopausal transition. Just that's just a baked in
Eh,
difficulty.
and you don't actually know if you're in peri or menopause until hindsight. So, like,
Yeah, you can tell you're in perimenopause because your cycles can get wonky. We can look at FSH levels. There are some hormones that we can check, but you don't know that you have entered the menopausal transition. I'm going to define terms here in a second, but you don't know that. So, for instance, you don't know that you're in menopause or that you've passed through menopause until you get to the other side of it.
yep,
Yeah. So that's a problem too. But this study, so this is something called a longitudinal study. So this most studies we think about, like, they have some kind of intervention, and like they'll have a group that actually does the intervention or gets the treatment or does this or that. Like, we visit some kind of treatment or thing upon the treatment group, right? And then you've got a control group that doesn't get the intervention, or they're a placebo group, or something like that. But this is a different kind of study. This is called a longitudinal study, and this is very similar. We talked about another famous longitudinal study when we talked about women's hormones, and that's the Women's Health Initiative, right? So when we talked about perimenopause and menopause, I think we did 3 episodes on that. That was data that was we talked about hormone therapy and misinterpretations of data from the Women's Health Initiative study. That was also a giant longitudinal study. So what this is essentially, researchers will carve a swath, usually of thousands of participants, and they will determine that, okay, we're going to look at these metrics across all of these people in our group. So in this case, they had, I think it was like 3,000 women in the entire study. Um, and we'll get through the study parameters here in a minute, but they took like 3,000 women, and they decided that they were going to collect certain data points along the next 13 to 15 years. All right. So the beauty of a longitudinal study is that they're amassing all of this data about this group of participants over the course of time. Now, how do you use longitudinal research data? Well, teams can go back, like at the end of this 15-year period. Now, different research teams can go back and say, hey, we want to look at weight gain. And another team might say, hey, we want to look at the effects of smoking. And another team might say, hey, we want to look at the impact of, diet over time, if those were some of the metrics that they looked at, right? So researchers can go back into a longitudinal study and they can say, oh, I see that you looked at these 20 things. We want to do a research study on these 3 things based on the data that you collected. So for this particular study, they took SWAN study data and they looked at physical, psychological, biological, and social changes in women. All right. Now, this was a study that began collecting data in 1996, and it went for 13 to 15 years, depending on the study cohort that we're talking about. Now, they chose women in 7 geographic regions all across the country. This is Boston, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Oakland, Los Angeles, and then a cohort from Hudson County, New Jersey. And then these participants, so in order to be in the study, you had to be 42 to 52 years of age. You had to have an intact uterus and at least 1 ovary. So you could not have had a hysterectomy. You had to have one working ovary, and also no hormone replacement therapy. You could not have ever have received hormone replacement therapy for menopausal changes. Um, you could not be pregnant or lactating, and you had to have had at least one period in the prior 3 months. So this ensured that you were not postmenopausal already, right? Because there are some women who enter menopause very early. So the data collection, again, over the course of 13 to 15 years, these women were asked, and they were asked to track their menstrual cycles. All right. So there's two things that they were asked to do: track their menstrual cycles and then participate in a yearly body composition analysis. Now, only about 1,200 out of the 3,300 women were in a geographic location where they had access to a DEXA or a body comp system or scanner. All right. So they became the 1,200 participant cohort that our study is looking at, because they could participate in the body composition data collection. All right. So what this consisted of, they would get their body weight. This is once a year. Get their body weight, their fat mass, and their lean body mass. Okay. So we've got cycle tracking. We've got body weight, fat mass, and lean body mass. Now, this is a great design because in retrospect, the researchers could look back and say, oh, okay, for each of these women, this is her last period that she had. All right. And so you're able to determine if the body composition changes, how that relates to that marker in time of the last menstrual period. Okay. So, a very elegantly designed study. Simple, elegant. Most of the good studies are. They're very simple and straightforward.
Well, and the
So,
data collected was just so
mhm,
it wasn't just weight and
right,
cycle. It
right.
was fat mass and lean mass,
Yep, yeah. No,
which is so
that was
big.
absolutely critical. So some more study details. So here's what the researchers did. They defined terms. So they they decided that the premenopausal state was going to be 8 to 2 years. So 8 years to 2 years prior to the menopause transition. So let's say that, a woman had her last period in the year 2000. All right. So according to this study, the premenopause period would be 1992 to 1998. All right, because that is between 8 and 2 years prior to that menopause transition. Okay. Now, the menopause transition itself is going to be 2 years before, all the way through to 1.5 years after the very last period. So if your last period was in the year 2000, then the menopause transition would be, let's just say January of the year 2000, okay? So the menopause transition would be from January of the year 1998 all the way through June of 2002, or 2001. 2001? I think 2001.
2001.
Yes. Thank
Yeah,
you.
2001.
Thank you. Okay. So that is a 3.5 year period, with 2 years before the final period and 1.5 years after. And that is called the menopausal transition. Okay. So when I mention menopausal transition, you know that I'm talking about this 2 years before, 1.5 year after that final period or menstrual cycle. Then the post menopause period that they looked at was, again, from the 1.5 years after the final period to out 10.5 years beyond the final period. All right. So we're talking like June of 2010 in this case, all the way out to June of 2010. Right.
Yep.
Now, the average age of the final menstrual period was 52. Okay.
You're almost
which
there.
I am totally average. Never been so happy to be average. I am ready to be done, and God
Yeah.
willing, I will be. All right. So here are the results. Now, they looked at weight loss, they looked at lean muscle mass, and they looked at fat mass. So let's see what happened with weight loss. So remember, gang, we're talking 3 different periods of time: premenopause, menopausal transition, and postmenopause. All right. So weight loss, the trajectory of weight loss across the first 2 phases, so
So
premenopause
pre and
and
transition.
menopausal transition, is exactly the same. But once you are a year and a half out from that final period, it leveled off and it stopped going up. Okay?
And it's weight loss.
No. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is weight gain.
Oh,
No,
sorry.
this
Okay.
yeah, no, I misspoke there. This is weight gain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think
Yeah,
women will be
whoa.
like, "Hey, now, I
Yeah, I
didn't
know.
lose
I'm
weight."
not losing anything. In fact, I have found quite a bit along the way here. So yeah, the trajectory of weight gain. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Across the first 2 phases is exactly the same. So you don't get to that place where your weight is steady again until you are a year and a half out from that final period. Okay. Now,
Yay.
right? I know, it's crazy. But this is where, you could look at this data and say, well, it's just aging because this is what happens to men too, right? But
Right.
this is where we start to tease this apart. Now, what happens to lean muscle mass and what happens to
Mhm.
fat mass? Let's talk about muscle mass first.
This is awesome. Not
So
awesome,
this
but
lean muscle mass appears to be on a very, very slightly upward trajectory. So we seem in the premenopausal period, remember this is 8 to 2 years before your final period. You seem to be gaining small amounts of lean muscle. All right? Now, it's a very mild curve, like it's almost imperceptible, but it is going up. But once you hit the menopausal transition, this is 2 years before and 1.5 years after your final period, it takes an abrupt reversal of direction. So it's not like the curve just flattens out. No, you're not gaining any more lean muscle. No, ladies, it goes down. So
yes.
you are losing lean muscle mass in a pretty precipitous fashion. So it goes down throughout the entire menopausal transition phase. I can attest to this. It seems like one morning I woke up flabby. I'm not kidding you. Like, I've always had a lot of muscle mass. Like, I have a lot of muscle mass on my frame. I always have. It's just kind of how my family is built. And I've always been a very active person, when I was a young kid and all through, most of my adult years, very, very active. And, oh my gosh, like I woke up and it really was about 2 years before all this started, where it was just like, "Oh my gosh, my legs feel different, like they're squishy. What is happening?" So yeah, I can, and anything I'm gonna tell you is purely anecdotal, just my own N=1 story, but I have absolutely experienced this.
Mm.
So so that's what happens to lean muscle mass. So now let's talk about fat mass. Okay. In the pre-menopausal state, again, 8 years to 2 years, the fat mass is going up and it's going up at a slightly sharper rate than the lean muscle mass. So we are gaining fat mass more than we are gaining lean muscle mass. But again, it's at a very, very it's at a very low level. Okay. So we gain about 1% fat mass per year in that premenopausal period. Okay. Now, once the menopausal transition hits, Remember what happened to the lean muscle mass? It did an about face and it just started going down, right? The fat mass, however, moves sharply up. So it's
Yes.
like a double whammy.
Yeah, they
And
literally
so,
cross paths
yeah.
right at the end of the menopausal transition,
Mhm.
and fat loss comes in the lead, or
Yes. No,
fat
it's
mass goes in the
crazy.
lead.
Yeah, and so you go from gaining 1% of fat mass per year to 1.7. That is a significant increase. That's like a 70% increase. Which is just nuts. So what this means is that there's a greater than 6% increase in total body fat mass over just the menopausal transition. And that is absurd.
So hopefully, if you're listening and you're in this transition and you're
Oh
like, "Oh my
gosh.
gosh, thank
Mhm.
you. Thank you. Thank you." Like,
Yeah,
um,
you knew something was happening to you,
yeah.
but I
And
swear people are there are fitness influencers and there are people on the grams and on the TikToks and on all the socials, and they're like, it has nothing to do with your hormones. You're just sedentary and you need to
eat less,
but
move more,
yes, and you know that
control your
something is
stress.
wrong. Oh my gosh, I swear I just want to eat somebody's face off every time I hear that. Um no, something is happening to you. Like,
Yeah.
something is happening to you. And here's the thing, ladies, I'm not even saying we have all the answers. We're going to talk about some things that we can do to hopefully make this an easier transition, but my gosh, if I had all the answers, I wouldn't be as frustrated as I am.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's an incredibly frustrating time. We have only just begun to have some good research that is actually coming out and looking at this.
Mhm.
Um, and is this the be all end all research? No, it's not. I think there's some confounders in this data that I actually want to talk about. And however, it's a good start. That's what I'll say. It's a
Yeah.
really, really good start.
It's
So,
another picture that hasn't been shared
yes.
before, you know?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And another just incredibly disrespectful and insulting thing that happens is that women go and complain to their providers about the changes that are happening and what is going on with me. And instead of telling her, listen, I don't have all the answers for this, but this is what's happening to you and it's real. And absolutely you are feeling different things going on right now. No, instead of doing that, they're offering women antidepressants.
Uh-huh.
And that is so insulting and so discouraging and so dismissive. Talk about gaslighting. It
Yes.
just no, there's something wrong with your brain. Your perception of your reality is off. You're not experiencing something outside what's between your two ears, and that's incredibly insulting. Um, all right, so I want to say the results of this another way. So let's talk about these time periods and what is happening. So during the premenopausal state, again, 8 years to 2 years prior to the final menstrual period, all three metrics are increasing. So this is weight, this is lean muscle, and this is fat mass. They are all going up. Now, some are going up faster than others, but they're all going up. During the menopausal transition, once you hit the 2 years prior to that final period, the weight gain curve is the same. It's still going up, but at the exact same rate as before. It's just a straight line. All right. But fat accumulation gets a boost and lean muscle mass actually heads the opposite direction and goes down. All right.
Yeah.
Now, during the post-menopausal period, so this is 1.5 years after your final period, everything reverts to this homeostatic line and remains the same. So, what I want to say is if you don't have much muscle mass to begin with, and you're going into this peri or premenopausal state and then further into the menopausal transition, then once you hit menopause, it's like, you know that saying, you have to go to war with the army you have? Yeah, you got to go into that postmenopausal state with the body you have, because it's very difficult to put on muscle in a really, really meaningful way. Is it impossible? No, it isn't. But it
But it's an
requires an
uphill battle.
insane amount of work. Yeah,
Yeah.
on
And
the
that's
back
why
end.
we hound, getting your
Yep.
protein in, doing resistance
Mhm.
training, make sure you're practicing progressive
Yep.
overload. And it's not just because we think it's the only way to exercise. No, it is the best way
Right.
to
Right.
exercise for longevity,
Yeah.
especially for women. I mean, men need it too, but we're looking at this study and it's just
Right.
like so evident.
Ugh.
I love the analogy of like you're headed into battle. Like
Mhm.
what armor do you have on?
Right. Yeah, how much muscle are you taking with you into this menopausal transition? Because you will come out the other side with less than you went in with. So you
So
better
you
make
basically
sure.
need to make sure you have extra
Yes.
storage or you've
Yes.
optimized as much as you can
Yeah,
prior to.
absolutely. Absolutely. Now I also want to make sure that people are understanding that this is the I'm a data driven person. I like studies, I like evidence. However, it can really only take you so far, because everybody is an individual, right? And that's the basic tenet of functional medicine, is that everyone is an individual. Everyone has a different and unique experience. So when I'm throwing out these numbers, like the average age of this, and the premenopausal period is between 8 and 2 years, and this period is 3.5 years, and your mileage may vary, right? You may be one of those people, one of those rare women that actually go for a year with no period and then have another one. Okay. And we've talked about this before, that it's just kind of this arbitrary label that's slapped on it that will get the vast majority of women. But yeah, you may have a different experience than what we're talking about here, but this is going to be the majority of people and their experience with this. Um, Now, I I had I had some I'm always kind of a contrarian when I read studies, because, every study has its strengths, and every study has its weaknesses, every study has its shortcomings, every study has its limitations. Um, Now, I didn't actually get to this discussion on, uh, Dr. Campbell and, was it Brandy?
Yeah.
On their work. Yeah. I didn't get to this point in their work. We probably do have some overlap in terms of what I saw as confounders and what they mention as confounders, but we will get to that in another episode as well. I want you guys, don't lose heart, because we are going to continue this conversation and talk about what we can do to make this to make your menopause as oh gosh, as painless as possible, I guess, to make it as the least amount of disruption to your life as
Mhm.
possible. So we are going to be talking about this in an upcoming episode. So stay tuned and listen to the next one. But here is a possible confounder that occurred to me. Um, so the menopausal transition period, okay, this is what appears to be the most volatile in relation to these aberrant changes. So we're talking about the negative changes in composition. They seem to have their greatest degree of volatility during the menopausal transition, that 3.5 years. Now, interestingly, this mirrors that 3.5 year period. Well, that just happens to be when two hormones are on the move. All right. And Bill Campbell raised this point in the last part of the study information. And he said, well, we see a precipitous drop in estradiol. This is the form of most common form of estrogen in the female body. So we see a drop in estradiol, and then we see a really, really sharp increase in something called follicle stimulating hormone during that 3.5-year period. Now, follicle stimulating hormone, that is a hormone that is telling the ovary, hey, we need to ripen a follicle. Like, we got to get an egg out. Because the body is like, oh, wait a second, we do this every month. We do this every month, and now we're slowing down. No, you've got to mature an egg. You have to mature a follicle. So that's one of the ways that we can tell if a woman is in that kind of menopausal transition phase, is if her follicle stimulating hormone is really high. Because her brain is saying, okay, it's that time of the month. We gotta do this. We've been doing this for 30 years. We gotta kick one of these suckers out. So, and then the ovaries are just sputtering, going, we don't have anything left. Like, there's no more eggs in here. There's nothing left. We're done. So those two hormones are really on the move during that 3.5-year time. So now, correlation does not equal causation, right? Except that it could be responsible for the recomp. And this is what Campbell puts forth, that, okay, so it would seem that, the estrogen decrease would probably be responsible for what we're seeing in the lean muscle mass, as well as the fat mass increase. So my issue with that is that what I see in clinical practice is that we've got way more women who are obese and who have way more adiposity or fat tissue than they did even 25 years ago when this study data was being collected. All right. Now,
Yep.
here's the key about this adipose tissue. Adipose creates estrogen. So what I see in clinical practice is I see perimenopausal women who actually have estrogen levels that are higher than a woman in the middle of her fertile years. Their fat tissue creates estrogen. All right. That's why there is a relationship between estrogen receptor positive breast cancers and obesity. It's because the obese tissue, the fat tissue, the adipose tissue creates estrogen. All right. So, we're seeing lots of women in these estrogen dominant situations during their perimenopause, where their E2, their estrogen, is actually quite high. So, if the drop in estrogen was really responsible solely for the lean muscle loss and the fat gain, then why don't we see the women with elevated estrogens? Why do we still see their lean muscle mass going down too? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
Yes.
anyway, that is just a confounder. Now, I want to talk about some other potential confounders also related to this particular study design. And I think a big part of the problem is that our population doesn't look like we did 25 years ago. We don't.
Uh-uh.
Our food is just so bad. We're full of chemicals. We're walking through toxic soup every day. The
Yep.
amount of agrochemicals that people are exposed to now versus even just 25 years ago, even just one generation prior, it would blow your mind.
Yep.
So we've got all kinds of estrogenic compounds in the environment too. So yeah, this is a problem. So this data collection began in the mid 90s. And so when we look at things like food quality, we look at things like, estrogenic compounds in the environment. How about things like lifestyle, right? Our stress is through the roof now. It's different than it used to be. Then I also want to talk about GLP-1s. They were not available 25 years ago. And so you want to talk about lean muscle loss. Go and listen to our GLP-1. That is Ashley and I's number one concern with these GLP-1s is that you lose lean muscle mass on these drugs. And yet you throw a rock and hit 50 people that are on them.
Yep.
Okay. So this is going to make for a much different landscape as well. So the
Yes.
data, this study is fabulous. I'm so glad that the data exists. I'm glad that this study was done, but I'm just saying it is a different world right now, and it's not a better one.
No.
In fact, it's probably much, much worse.
Yeah.
So,
Honestly, this study needs to re-happen and should have
yes,
happened,
yes, we
starting
need
2010.
precisely. We need updated information. Now, it occurred to me that so let's just say that, the decrease in estrogen is causing problems, is causing lean muscle mass. However, decrease in estrogen also comes along with, in fact, it's some crazy percentage, like 80 something percent of women will complain about massive joint and muscle pain because of estrogen decline. Now, are we losing lean muscle mass because of the estrogen decline, or is it a secondary effect caused by all the pain that people are in and they just can't participate in these muscle building activities because there is just terrible pain that's involved with this. There's things
Mhm.
like frozen shoulder that are related to estrogen dipping. And so, yeah, is it a secondary effect because women can't go and work in the gym like they used to be able to?
Yeah.
Now, I have the same question for mood and affect, because as your hormones tank, as they go down, your mood and affect, women find themselves in a depressive state. They find themselves more anxious. That makes it much more difficult to do the kinds of self-care activities that we need to in order to maintain a good, physiology. So I would like to know, is it a direct impact or is it
Mm.
a secondary impact of some of these other changes that
Yeah.
happen as a result?
And like I know some very active women going through perimenopause, and they're like, I never struggled with motivation to get down to the gym. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's like I don't even want to go down.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
those
Exactly.
are definitely real things. I also have seen a trend with as people age, and maybe this is postmenopause. I don't have that anecdotal evidence right like for myself, but I also see a trend in eating less
Yep.
overall.
Yep.
And with perimenopause and menopausal transition weight gain, we're seeing
Mhm.
women freaking out and eating less
Mhm.
when that's probably the last thing they need to do because their body's already under stress.
Right.
And then the foods that they are gravitating towards are probably those higher processed, carb
Mhm.
heavy, um,
Right.
processed foods because they're
Right.
easy to get to because you're in this basically
Yeah,
depressive state. So it's just
exactly.
this like cyclone uh, of like
Mhm.
all these things being thrown at these women, and
Yeah.
it's like, okay, how can we take a step back with now that we have this data and be like, okay, we know these things are going to take place more than likely for the majority of
Mhm.
the women, but how do we approach it smarter and,
Yeah.
maybe try to avoid some of these side effects?
Yep. Absolutely. And then just the final point that I had is that we know that we're relatively certain that these women in the study, so these 1,200 volunteers, they were not resistance training, they were not eating a high protein diet, and we're relatively certain that these things make a positive difference, right? I mean, I think you'd be foolish to say otherwise, but it would be helpful to know how much of a difference do they make, right? Like, how much do they move the needle? Can we completely erase the loss of lean muscle mass and the gain of fat mass with the right diet, with the right amount of activity, and with a sane amount of activity, right? Because these are prime working years that women are, having to be out in the workforce, and
Mhm.
you can't afford to be at the gym for 5 hours a day. Like
But
it
I would also argue that that's not actually what you need because
right.
you're putting your body under in
Yeah.
more undue
But
stress.
we don't actually know, right? It's not
Yeah, we don't know.
quantified. It's
Yeah,
it's not quantified. And so, yeah, that would be, the next place that I would like to go with the research is just to know, how big an impact, what does it look like for women now? And then how big a positive impact can we have with the things that we know to do? So anyway, that's where we'll leave you, with the information tonight. And then for our next episode, be sure to tune in, because we don't want to leave you on a down note. We're going to talk about the things that we can do that we know impact positively. We don't have all the answers. Nobody does. And we're not going to pretend that this is the way to do this, and this will solve all your problems. But we can certainly help you to make some good decisions that will make your transition a lot more bearable.
awesome. Well, thanks for breaking this study down and for kind of just giving us this picture of what data is actually showing. And
Yeah.
it's sort of comforting. Obviously, it's depressing in the same sense, but I think with this data, there's a lot of things that can come from it. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
excited to
Absolutely.
dive in a little bit further. So
Yeah.
if you are going through this, if you're out of it, if you're just preparing for it, you're preparing
Mm.
for battle as I am,
Uh-huh. Yep.
um, then
Solidarity, sister.
please let us know what questions you have, what
Yes.
maybe you're going through,
Mm-hmm.
maybe what you're being told, and we would love to hear from you on that because believe me, you're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
These symptoms and side effects are very real, and the purpose of this whole podcast is to provide you guys with information that you can easily digest, but then have applicable applications of what you
Mm-hmm.
can do to help improve your life for better. So,
Yep.
please reach out to us. Our contact information is in the show notes below, and we will continue this discussion in our next episode. And we will see you then.
Bye. The content provided in the AA podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only. The podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical advice.